Listening to that type of introduction, I was wondering whether they had changed the speaker for the feature address. At the risk of being considered a renegade, but in the interest of saving time, I wish you to beg your permission to adopt the protocol that was previously established by the earlier speakers. So I hope that's fine with you. All right, good. Graduates, while I'm filled with honor and the pleasure of addressing you, I'm tempered by the memories of a hot afternoon in June 1986 when I sat in this very auditorium in one of your seats, clad in a brown gown and cap with a yellow tassel like you, fidgeting and choopsing, anxiously waiting the end of the feature address. While I won't divulge the name of the speaker, I will tell you that he was, and hopefully still is, a noble and wise man, but he'd lost us halfway through his speech when we thought his middle should have been his end. In fact, my crew and I were so busy to begin life after high school that we began clapping the end of his presentation much too early. So, hoping to defy the saying that what goes around comes around, and trying to avoid being a drag on your special day, I will try to keep my beginning quite close to my end, since it would be unconscionable of me to do otherwise, now that my role is reversed. I'll also try my best to break tradition and reduce the preaching to you, since, as I've hinted earlier, I believe in the wisdom of the saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Instead, I will share reflections of my life as a student and professional, hoping that from my failures and successes, you would learn lessons that perhaps would apply to your own background and circumstance. So I hope that you would consider my reliance on the first person singular not as proof of someone too in love with himself, but as evidence of my respect for individual thought and critical thinking. I was hardly a model student at the DGS, and certainly no David Hodge. That label better fits Stephen, my brother, which I think you know as Mr. Frampton. I remember him, a distinguishable scholar, of course, under the pipe in the backyard at 20 to 8 in the morning, soaked in water and tears. He was heartbroken when he realized that he would be reaching school late that morning. I was rather amused, since that was his only lateness for the entire year. But when I began laughing at him, I had to duck a backhand from my guardian. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to duck the bar of soap that they threw at me. Punctuality for me was more a matter of circumstance and mood. It gained importance depending on the amount of trouble it would get me into. Unsurprisingly, when I was missing one more demerit to receive my third detention for the term, an achievement that would certainly land me in hot water, since the school would send me back home, demanding that I only return with my guardians, I had to break that habit. So fear forced me to respect time, at least temporarily, until I backslid, and my friend, I'm a backslider, I certainly am. One morning I had a real close call though. I jumped out of the shower at 7:45, so frightened by the lateness of the time that I almost peed my pants. I knew that to avoid a suspension, I would need to set a new national record. I had to figure out a way to dress and travel from 14 Murphy's Lane in Goodwill to the Dominica Grammar School in 10 minutes. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the area, my house was about 100 meters from the Goodwill Savannah. So hoping that my achievement gets officially recorded in the Kubuli Book of National Records, I will disclose my strategy. Well, I didn't comb my hair. I put on underwear and my white shirt jack and slung my backpack over my back. I folded my khaki pants, hanging it over my left arm, and took a rag and my black suede shoes in the right hand. I scrambled out the back door and dashed down the track to Lower Murphy's Lane. Remember, I'm only in shirt jack and underwear now. I ran down the 188 steps that led to the bank of the Roseau River, where the stadium is now being built, raising my shoes to block my face from the unbelieving stares of the civil servants who themselves were late. I crossed the river with the end of my white shirt jack rolled up and my hands up in surrender position to avoid my uniform getting wet. On the other side of the river, I dried my legs and thighs and stood on the concrete embankment to slip on my pants and shoes just at the time that Beverly, a college student who I had a huge crush on, was passing. Well, I smiled sheepishly to fake my embarrassment and sprinted past her through the gate of the Dominica Grammar School playing field. Despite my regret at meeting Beverly at that time, I was relieved when I heard the unmistakable peal of the DGS school bell. I ran through the technical wing building up the steps of the school's 3rd floor and pushed the classroom door just as I heard Deborah Fountain say, "Present, miss." On the class register, Bernard Frampton came 2 names after. I had made it, and I didn't care one hoot about Mrs. Christian's squinted brow in reaction to my untidy appearance. This story epitomizes my time at high school. I showed rare moments of brilliance, but was never really an impressive academic, nor was I an exceptional athlete. Although I left javelin and discus records behind, mind you, and you can check the records if you wish. But there were a few things that I was known for. Although I was not a voracious reader, I loved words. And this reflected in my English and literature assignments. In fact, I loved words so much that I even made them up to the amusement of and disgust of my teachers. Despite my chameleon scholarship, the school continually selected me to represent it at essay competitions. And I wonder now whether that wasn't a serious indictment on my other schoolmates. Undoubtedly, my seesaw grades frustrated several of my teachers and colleagues, some of whom I see right here. Your principal now, in fact, Mrs. Alicia Jaja, who was unfortunate to be my form teacher for too many terms, documented my attitude to school perhaps most insightfully in her comments on my report card. "Bernard is indifferent to schoolwork," she wrote in that column for teachers' comments that I had grown to dislike. "Bernard is not focused. Bernard is too inconsistent. And the most haunting of all, even today, Bernard only works under pressure." Yes, Mrs. Jajak, I still have those report cards. Another form teacher, an outstanding social studies and history teacher, Edward Lawrence, who unfortunately for me was a family friend, even came home at the end of the 2nd form to give unflattering commentary about my classroom conduct. I sat helplessly listening to him recount the time he entered the classroom to find me standing on the teacher's chair with a coiled up exercise book raised to my mouth while I imitated George Michael's performance of Careless Whisper. He told of the times that he'd asked for homework and I greeted him with a huge smile and empty hands. He reported on the girls that I'd brought to tears with innocuous but embarrassing gimmickries, like the time I'd put a mabuya in Cheryl's pencil case, knowing she had a dreadful fear of lizards. He must have said everything but what they wanted to hear. And oh yes, he was handsomely rewarded. My guardians gave him a VIP seat to witness my impressive acrobatics in my losing battle against the guava whip. And strange as it may seem, I loved school. That was my life. I was passionate about almost everything about it except the rigors of academic discipline. I only missed school for discomforting illnesses, and almost every weekday, I would be back on the school grounds by 2:30 p.m. with or without the consent of my guardians. If I were not representing the school at some game, I was practicing some sport or buried in what my school diploma called school spirit. And yes, there was some vice driven by curiosity, peer pressure, and instinct, vice both inevitable and unnecessary, whether it was taking the keys to the storeroom with the high jump mattresses without permission to use these huge sponges for anything other than high jump, or whether it was docking our studies to climb the school wall to watch the first division football, we always got into trouble that was never too serious. And yet, despite my wayward behavior, I always retained this overpowering desire to become someone important, to make something of myself, as my deceased Auntie Violin would say whenever she wrung my ears or pinched my skin. My CXC results were unremarkable. In fact, they were not even good enough to get me into the sixth form college. And when job application after job application brought rejection, I became afraid that my life would be nondescript, that I was on the road to becoming a nobody. I realized that I needed to make some serious changes in my life. Thus began my journey towards shaping my adulthood, the journey towards becoming a man, towards becoming a professional. Throughout this imperfect and arduous journey, I tried to adopt 6 traits that were common with the successful people that I knew. First, successful people invest in themselves. When you invest in yourself, it encourages people to invest in you. When I could find no job after graduating from the DGS, I joined the People's Action Theater and nourished my talent for the stage. Although I labored long nights and early mornings at this very Arawak House of Culture, earning no money from acting, I developed invaluable skills that assisted me to launch my broadcasting career. My theatrical exposure also encouraged me to settle down to more productive habits and nurtured my love for words. I returned to reading with fervor, and some of the scripts that I had to read for theater contributed to that. Interestingly, the same novels that I had avoided studying for CXC literature, I began reading for leisure. The more I read, the more my appetite for knowledge became insatiable. Eventually, my basic theatrical training gave me a hunger for other training, and I aggressively pursued other free training opportunities. Many did not produce instant results, but I never gave up because I didn't want to be just another guy on the block. It was like any time I sat on the bench at the Goodwill Savannah, the book that I left unfinished at home kept singing Tanya Stevens' song to me. The streets don't love you like I do, and I think you know that. I began reading whatever I got my hands on and kept knocking on different doors. When I was not among the trainees selected for employment by Mapping Television, I petitioned to work for free to acquire experience. And after some fervent lobbying on my behalf by the training director, Mapping TV agreed and even gave me an honorarium. But while I was receiving a quarter of the salary of most of my colleagues, who were by far much older than I was, I felt I benefited much more than them, because at the age of 17, I was already receiving my first professional training. In retrospect, this was perhaps the biggest move of my professional career. Second, successful people know what they want. If you don't know what you want, you'll fall for anything. I have to admit I struggled a lot with this one. It took me quite some time to shed the other distractions of my life, especially recreational sports and entertainment. Approaching my 20s, it was difficult for me to accept that if I wanted to become a serious journalist, I had to significantly reduce the amount of time I spent on the playing field, at bars and nightclubs, in front of the television. I confess for most of my early career, I was not very successful at doing that. But the demands of the profession pushed me to, and I eventually yielded. You see, good journalists work long and unusual hours and read extensively to keep up to speed. Third, successful people work hard. You know what they say, if it comes too easy, it won't last. Now that you've reached the early stages of your adulthood, you're going to confront competition like you've never known before. And you're going to have to work hard to distinguish yourself from others, even if you have some special gifts, perhaps like David Hodge. You will need to work hard to break through the crowd. People who often review my background often think that I am trying to be modest when I insist that I'm simply a hard worker, not someone with above average intelligence or who's gifted. But I truly believe it, and if you don't believe me, ask my high school teachers. Nothing comes easy for me, and I salute you if you're one of the lucky few who can say otherwise. I frequently have to read a paragraph twice or double-check simple mathematical calculations, and Mr. Goldberg knows of that. True, I didn't do too badly at university, but I was often among the first to enter the library and among the last to leave it. I was among those with the most sources for any given research paper, and among those who were the last to finish an exam. Fourth, successful people are passionate about what they do. If you're not having fun, then you're missing the point. To me, this is one of the most important points of all. After all, life is too short to be miserable all the time. If you've not yet done so, soon you'll be choosing a career. Whether you choose a profession that pays well or brings you status, make sure you choose one that you'll enjoy. Remember, most workers spend more of the weekday hours that they are awake at work rather than at home. Can you imagine what a dreadful life they would have if most of the day they were doing something they did not enjoy? And yes, there are a lot of them out there, but I don't wish that for you. Perhaps you can reduce your risk of joining them by beginning to imagine the type of work that you see yourself enjoying all day, even if you won't get paid to do it. Then when the salary comes, it won't be the major incentive that drives you. But while you should be honest with yourself about comfort levels, you must also be realistic. You will need to survive. And unfortunately, very few people ever get a chance to advance themselves or earn a living doing the things that bring them the greatest joy. However, most successful people either develop fun ways of doing what they're required to do, or they discover creative methods of making what they love to do worthwhile. I've not loved all the jobs that I've had, but I appreciated them and learned to love some aspects of them, knowing that at various levels they were providing me with knowledge, skills, and experiences that I could use to develop a career I would love. It wasn't long before I recognized that it was audiovisual production that really made me tick. I would spend full nights and days at the office, the studio, and the editing room without complaining or bothering. No one required or expected me to do it but myself.